Welcome to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune. Henry Chop reporting. Saturday, February 1st, 1941. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:03 a.m. It set at 5:05 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, increasing high cloudiness on Saturday. Sunday, mostly cloudy with occasional light rain or drizzle. No decided change in temperature. Moderate west to southwest winds. The low temperature, 26 degrees. The high temperature, 38. Today's headline, Halifax steers FDR bill. Washington, D.C., January 31st. After Lord Halifax, British ambassador to the United States, paid a surprise visit today to Senator Walter F. George, Democrat, Georgia, chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the chairman announced that an effort would be made to speed Senate action on the president's dictator bill. Halifax talked with George for about 15 minutes and urged quick action on the measure. He also revealed that he intends to listen in person to congressional debate on the bill when it is up for consideration. We discussed the timetable of the bill, said Halifax. Senator George then stated that a limit might have to be placed on the examination of witnesses before the committee and that hearings next week might be lengthened into the evening. He expressed a hope that the committee could complete action on the measure in 2 days after the public hearings close on February 10th. Washington, D.C., January 31st. The minority of the Committee on Foreign Affairs today filed a formal report to the House condemning President Roosevelt's plan for furnishing unlimited military equipment to Great Britain as a measure that would establish another dictatorship and plunge this country into foreign war with all its resources, including manpower. Asserting that they favor all aid to Britain short of war and short of sacrifices of our own national defense and freedom, the minority members charged that the delay in the achievement of this object is being caused by the president's bid for unprecedented power, under which he would exercise arbitrary control of everything in the country and become dictator general of the war in Europe. The minority members said they had offered unsuccessfully in the committee and will again offer in the House a constructive democratic program to aid Britain and to keep us out of war. The report summarized this proposed substitute as follows. Number one, a $2 billion credit to Britain to be used in this country for purchasing arms when her dollar balance for this purpose is exhausted, requiring reasonable collateral security if available. Number two, permit the sale by our government of arms to Britain only when our highest Army and Navy officers certify in writing such arms are not necessary for our national defense. Number three, a 1-year time limit on all extraordinary powers. Congress meets again next year and can easily extend this time limit if our interests require it. Number four, provide that no vessels of the United States Navy shall be disposed of without the consent of Congress. Number five, prohibit the use of our ports for repair bases for belligerent ships. We must not bring the war to American ports. Number six, prohibit the use of American vessels to transfer exports to belligerents. Number seven, prohibit the convoying of merchantmen by our Navy. One sunken ship might plunge us into war. With both the majority and minority reports submitted, the director bill will come before the House for disposition next Monday, under a special rule agreed upon today. By the Rules Committee, there will be 3 days of general debate, after which the measures will be considered paragraph by paragraph for amendment. Passage of the bill by the House is expected by the end of next week. Then it will go to the Senate, where it is unlikely to be passed before the end of February. Washington, D.C., January 31st. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox spent 2 uncomfortable hours today under a merciless grilling by Senator Gerald P. Nye, Republican, North Dakota, who reminded Knox that he had repeatedly denounced President Roosevelt's craving for totalitarian powers before he accepted appointment to the cabinet. Knox appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in support of the president's dictatorship measure, which takes enormous powers away from Congress and gives them to the chief executive for the ostensible purpose of rendering aid to Great Britain. Knox declared he did not consider the measure in any sense a bill to make the president a dictator. When a number of his speeches, statements, and editorials made before his cabinet appointment were read to him as proof that he once viewed with alarm the president's dictatorship ambitions, he offered the defense that he had made public such views in an attitude of partisanship. He was now acting as a nonpartisan, he asserted. Washington, D.C., January 31st. The National Board of Management of the Daughters of the American Revolution, in session here today, after considering the dictatorship bill, adopted a resolution urging members of Congress to reserve to themselves the powers and responsibilities entrusted to them. Congress also is asked to make such provisions for aid to Great Britain as will be least likely to involve this nation in active participation in war. A plea is made to increase with all possible speed the defenses of the United States. The board acted as the representative of the organization's 155,000 members dedicated to preserving the ideals of democracy on which this country was founded. And now for world news. Cairo, Egypt, January 31st. British advance forces, bombers, and motorized troops operated west of the fallen Italian base of Derna toward Benghazi today, methodically clearing the way for the expected general assault upon that important naval center and capital of eastern Libya. Official news was scarce, but it appeared that the same program that reduced Bardia and Tobruk and yesterday Derna was at work again. Dashes of reconnaissance by Britain's dusty tanks and an offensive patrol of the air by British bombers. The British Air Force told of a heavy bombardment of the Italian airbase at Barche, 120 miles beyond Derna on the road to Benghazi. It said that its day-long activities of yesterday had been mainly focused on that military settlement. The airdrome was declared to have been repeatedly attacked, and direct hits were claimed on a series of hangars and other buildings. A single Italian plane was reported downed. The British in the advance toward Benghazi turned their backs on the bleak wastes of the eastern Libyan desert and entered fertile upland country. Between Benghazi and Derna, a matter of 150 miles, are the Jebel Akdar Mountains. The range extends inward about 80 miles from the Mediterranean coast, sloping gradually to the desert. Between the north slopes, which are wooded, and the desert lies a fertile area rich in crops, notably barley and grazing land. Beyond Benghazi, along the Gulf of Sirte, a waste of desert and rocks stretches all the way to Tripolitania. The British command covered its activities on every front, from Libya to the fighting along the frontier areas of Italian Somaliland, 2,000 miles to the south in 10 words. On all fronts, operations continued to develop to our advantage. Khartoum, Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, January 31st. Information gained on a flight around Ethiopia and the Indian Ocean to Khartoum indicates penetration of Italy's possessions in East Africa by British Empire troops is underway on the Kenya front. South African troops crossed the border into Italian-conquered Ethiopia in the neighborhood of Dolo and Lake Stefanik last Wednesday. Responsibility for the entire southwestern sector from the Nasher east to the sea is left to the South African forces. They are mostly South Africans. The Army is equally balanced between the mechanized forces and infantry. Supplies and troops are arriving constantly. The morale of the troops is high and their equipment is in good condition. Special attention is given to lines of communication. The British are taking no chances on jumping the gun too soon. In the northwest sector, the British are continuing their drive in the direction of Argodat, Eritrea. They have also crossed the border in the vicinity of Galabat, Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, and are driving toward Lake Tsana, Ethiopia. The British have taken 1,500 prisoners in this area. Italian casualties totaled 3,500. The British casualties were less than 500. The British suffered a few casualties from over-anxiety on the Kassala-Argodat road. The retreating Italians left a time bomb under a bridge. It exploded, stopping small detachments covering the boundaries between the north and south fronts. The Asmara, Eritrea country is easily defended. It is almost impossible to penetrate because of mountains and few roads. The Italians are fighting to delay the British east of Argodat. Former Emperor Haile Selassie is in Ethiopia. He is accompanied by a strong escort. The English have been operating a fifth column among the Ethiopian natives for 6 months. The attitudes of the Sudanese toward the war was demonstrated in the case of the son of a tribal chief who herded 400 sheep 500 miles across the desert and presented them to the civil secretary at Khartoum. Athens, Greece, January 31st. A Greek government spokesman said tonight that a fresh counterattack by the Italians in the Albanian coastal sector, launched with large forces, had met a fate worse than any others yet tried. On the Central Front, north of Klissura, the spokesman asserted, Greek troops were advancing rapidly, pushing beyond the points from which the Italians had sprung for other unsuccessful counterdrives. Dispatches from that front said that the apparent fascist attempts to wrest the offensive from the Greeks now was regarded as a failure. Of the coastal sector fighting, the spokesman said the Italians were repulsed with such heavy losses that they retreated in confusion and had not yet had time to reorganize their positions. These fascist troops were pursued by us, and we succeeded in occupying a mountain 4,900 feet high beyond the positions from which the Italians launched this counterattack, the spokesman related. At another point, the Greeks were said to have occupied a height of some 6,500 feet and farther to the north repulsed the Italians from a height of 5,200 feet, the informant said. 200 Italian prisoners, including 7 officers, were declared to have been taken in the last of the series of frustrated Italians attacks along the coast. North of Klissura, the Greeks were said to have advanced their artillery positions for further shelling of the Italians. In Belgrade, Yugoslavia, military circles reported that Italian troops had withdrawn from Tepelini, also on the Central Front and a key point in the Greek drive toward the port of Valona. The Greeks said heaps of dead and many wounded were found in the abandoned Italian positions. A Greek physician in charge of sanitation in one sector said his men had buried 650 Italians at one point where a fascist charge had been tried unsuccessfully. Some Italian units were said to have lost as many as half their men. Premier General John Metexis, who died Wednesday, was buried today after a funeral at the cathedral conducted by the Metropolitan of Athens, head of the Greek Church, and attended by the royal family, the cabinet, high military officers, and members of the diplomatic corps. Belgrade, Yugoslavia, January 31st. Reports from Antivari on the Yugoslav Adriatic coast near the Albanian border said tonight that an unidentified submarine had attacked 3 Italian supply ships in the Adriatic and was believed to have sunk one. The submarine was said to have fired several torpedoes. The freighter Renunzio and one other escaped to Bar, but the 3rd Italian ship was missing. Berlin, January 31st. The well-informed commentary Dienst Deutschland regards Adolf Hitler's dictum that U-boat warfare is only about to begin in the spring as probably the most important section of his address yesterday. Germany has overlooked no possibility to expand her U-boat weapon both materially and as regards personnel in the best manner imaginable, Dienst said today. Authorized sources reiterated emphatically that Hitler referred only to ships reaching the English combat zone when he spoke of torpedoing vessels at sight. The Führer, in his anniversary speech, said, "Let there be no deception about one fact. Whoever believes he can help England must at all events know one thing. Every ship with or without convoy that comes within range of our torpedo tubes will be torpedoed." Berlin, January 31st. Long-range warplanes were reported by the German High Command today to have sunk the 3,677-ton merchant ship Ostward yesterday, 250 miles off Donegal Bay, Ireland. Bomb hits also were claimed on 2 other ships, each about 5,000 tons, 90 miles west of the Hebrides and 250 miles off Scotland, and upon a smaller vessel off the English east coast. Deal, England, January 31st. German guns along the coast of France have been lobbing shells 10 or 11 miles inland from the Kent coast in the last 3 days, but the random shots have been falling mostly in open country. One, however, knocked down a church steeple near Canterbury. Most of the previous shelling has been confined to the Dover Strait harbors and the actual coastline itself. Dover is 23 miles from France, hence the shells now have been fired at a distance of 34 miles. London, January 31st. German raiders flying singly but in impressive total numbers inflicted numerous casualties in London today, including Major Robert B. Williams, United States Air Observer, who was seriously injured. 3 hospitals and a number of other buildings were hit. Major Williams, the second American Army officer observer to become a casualty in the present war, was taken to a hospital and fears were expressed that he might lose sight of one eye. He was injured by a fragment from a 100-pound bomb. The censor authorized publication of the statement that Major Williams was not on duty when hit. A native of Albany, Texas, Major Williams, 39 years old, was the first American military casualty in this war since Captain Robert M. Losey, Assistant American Military Attaché at Stockholm, was killed in a German bombing raid at Dombas, Norway, April 21, 1940. Portsmouth, England, January 31st. Prime Minister Winston Churchill toured this biggest British naval base for 3 hours today, accompanied by Harry Hopkins, President Roosevelt's special emissary, and led dockyard workers in a vociferous 3 cheers for the President of the United States. To the Portsmouth City Fathers, he introduced Hopkins as the envoy and friend of President Roosevelt, that great statesman and friend of freedom and democracy, and added, "One cannot help feeling enormously encouraged by the spirit of the ever-growing movement of aid to Britain, which we say laying hold of the mighty masses of the United States." Standing in front of a ship, the Prime Minister then called for the 3 cheers for Mr. Roosevelt. The workers responded with a roar of hip hip hoorays. At one pause on his tour, Churchill gave half of one of his famous cigars to a dockyard worker who decided he'd like it as a souvenir. With Hopkins and Mrs. Churchill, the Prime Minister climbed across the docks and delved through the bomb-hit areas of the city. Everywhere, crowds greeted him with the shouts of "Good old Winnie," and his invariable reply was, "Good luck to you all." Earlier, Churchill visited Southampton. There he asked a crowd of civil defense workers, "Are we downhearted?" "No," they thundered. Speaking to the city council and Lord Mayor, Churchill declared the events in Libya and Albania had shown the rottenness and weakness of the Nazi fascist regime so far as Italy is concerned. The fascists were forced to bring in the Nazis to rescue and rule them. All this gives us encouragement to face the long, hard ordeals which lie before us, but to which we shall not be found unequal. We shall come through. We cannot tell when, we cannot tell how, but we will come through. When we have done so, we shall have the right to say that we live in an age that in all the long history of Britain was the most filled with glorious achievements and the most graced by duties done. London, January 31st. Wendell L. Willkie retired early tonight after a strenuous 6-hour inspection tour of British defenses against invasion at Hell's Corner at Dover and the southeast coast. Willkie drove to Dover and back, and his shoes and trousers still showed traces of white chalk from the cliffs when he returned to his hotel. Twice during his tour, anti-aircraft guns opened fire on German raiders, and he also witnessed some cross-channel shelling. Willkie said he was very impressed with the defenses and added, "I think the Germans have a tough job on if they try an invasion around where I have been." Willkie will spend the weekend in the country after lunching with Herschel Johnson, counselor of the American Embassy, tomorrow, and also will visit the Industrial Midlands. He plans to return to London on Tuesday night for dinner with a group of British writers. Berlin, January 31st. Reports that Wendell L. Willkie had been invited to visit Germany were denied by a government spokesman today. He said Germany would not object to such a visit and added that Willkie undoubtedly would find it instructive, particularly as he would not be obliged to run for an air raid shelter while in Berlin. Vichy, France, January 31st. The political situation of France was nearing a new crisis tonight, with informed persons saying that Pierre Etienne Flandin, the foreign minister, might have to resign. The newspapers of German-occupied Paris continued their campaign against the Vichy government as now constituted and said that German officials took the stand that Flandin was one of those responsible for the departure from the government of Pierre Laval, former vice premier, foreign minister, and political heir to the mantle of chief of state, Pétain. The Germans also were represented as feeling that collaboration between Germany and France was impossible unless Laval returned to the government. Indeed, they were said to feel the Vichy government's policy at present is Anglophile, favoring Britain. So far, Ferdinand de Brignon, the Vichy government's envoy to the occupying authorities, has not come back from Paris, and it still is unknown when Adolf Hitler's expected note on the question of collaboration will be brought to Vichy. Stockholm, Sweden, January 31st. General Maxime Weygand has refused to obey a Vichy government's order to return to France to report on the situation in Africa, the Berlin correspondent of the Dagens Nyheter reported today. He gave as a source of this report the German ambassador to Paris, Otto Abetz. Describing the growing anger in Berlin against Marshal Henri Pétain's government, the correspondent said that Abetz asserted on his last visit to Berlin that the real difficulty in the way of a Franco-German understanding was the attitude of General Weygand. The general was said to have refused to return because he was afraid he would not be allowed to return to Africa. London, January 31st. The Free French commander, General Charles de Gaulle, called today upon the unbeaten French armies under General Maxime Weygand in North and West Africa to throw off their shameful inertia and help complete the conquest of Italian Libya. "Don't you see it is up to you?" he asked in a French language broadcast over the British Broadcasting Company's facilities. "If the battle is lost," he went on, "French independence will vanish forever. But if it is won, the fate of our enemies will be sealed." Saigon, French Indochina, January 31st. Thailand and French Indochina ended 4 months of undeclared war along their 1,000-mile jungle-covered border today with an armistice drafted by Japanese mediators and signed aboard the Japanese light cruiser Natori. The agreement left Thai forces in possession of several areas in Cambodia province, southern Indochina, and one section in Laos in the north. It established a neutral zone extending 10 kilometers, 6.21 miles, on either side of a line fixed as the front. This is to be the demarcation line pending signature of a treaty to be negotiated at Tokyo with Japan as mediator. The Thai forces had pushed well into Cambodia at several points and into Laos in one district. Thailand claims territory in both provinces, which she says the French took from her half a century ago. Honolulu, January 31st. Admiral Kichisaburo Namuro, en route to Washington, D.C. as the new Japanese ambassador, said today, "My most ardent wish is not to have Japan and the United States at war. I am going to the United States for peace and not for war," he asserted. "There must be an understanding on both sides. The reestablishment of good relations is most important, not only to Japan, but also perhaps to your country, too." Nomura said he would seek to establish better trade relations with the United States. Asked whether he would attempt to negotiate a new trade treaty with America, he said, "Once we tried, certainly we wish to have better trade relations." Moscow, January 31st. Laurenti Beria, Commissar of Domestic Affairs, was appointed General Commissar of State Security of Soviet Russia today. Istanbul, Turkey, January 31st. Colonel William J. Donovan, unofficial United States observer making a tour of the Near East, arrived this afternoon at Istanbul Airport after a flight from Athens. He will consult Turkish leaders at Ankara. His plane was piloted by Lord Forbes, Assistant British Air Attaché at Athens. This was taken as emphasizing British interest in Donovan's Balkan tour. Donovan left the airport immediately for the American consulate. There, Lieutenant General Sir James Handaside Marshal Cromwell, head of the group of British officers in Turkey since January 13th for staff conferences and inspection, waited to confer with him. Further indicative of the British interest in Donovan's mission was the tour of the Libya battlefront they arranged for him while he was in Africa. He witnessed part of the successful siege of Tobruk. The American planned to leave by train tonight for Ankara, where he said he would remain 2 or 3 days. He expected to interview President Ismet Inonu, Foreign Minister Sukru Sarakoglu, and Premier Refik Saddam. Baltimore, Maryland, January 31st. Bearing a $1 million cargo of food, clothing, and medicine, the 5,100-ton United States Lines freighter Cold Harbor will sail from Baltimore tomorrow for Spain and Marseilles. The ship, with huge red crosses painted on its sides, will carry supplies for children in unoccupied France for general relief in Spain and 10,000 gift boxes for prisoners in German war camps. The trip through the blockade will be made with Britain's permission, and all belligerent nations have been notified, said Ernest W. Swift, Red Cross Vice Chairman in charge of foreign operations. The Cold Harbor, commanded by Captain Albert M. Moore, will carry for French children 500 tons of powdered whole milk, 250 tons of evaporated and condensed milk, 16,000 layettes, 17,000 sweaters, and $100,000 in vitamin concentrates and drugs, including sulfonamide. To Spain will go 4,500 tons of whole wheat flour and 250 tons each of powdered whole milk and condensed or evaporated milk. The cargo includes 26 trucks to aid in distribution. Brussels, Belgium, via Berlin, January 31st. Belgium's shortage of food and medical supplies is in many respects greater than it was after the 1914 German occupation, members of the Hoover Inquiry on European Human Needs said today. On the basis of information it said had come from many sources, the committee listed Belgian needs in order of urgency as wheat, canned foods, and especially milk, meat, oil, iodine, cod liver oil, and clothing. The committee, headed by Frederick Dorsey Stephens, departed for Berlin. London, January 31st. Food Minister Lord Woolton today threatened to put out of business butchers who do not distribute meat fairly. His bureau estimated that enough meat to cover a weekly ration of 26.4 cents worth of meat goes out from Central depots, although the ration is only 23 cents worth. Woolton said many housewives are unable to get their full ration because of inefficient meat cutting and favoritism to privileged customers. Limitations on sugar and other materials used in making chocolate will prohibit the manufacture of candy Easter eggs this year, the head of a big chocolate firm said. The health ministry warned the population against eating raw or partly cooked pork sausages following development of several cases of trichinosis. London, January 31st. Ernest Bevin, Minister of Labor, today announced he was particularly anxious to recruit the Mayfair Miss for war work. The Mayfair Miss was described as any pampered daughter of rich parents living in London's fashionable residential district and just having a good time. Bevin said he was enrolling a new army of 500,000 girls for jobs in munitions factories. These young women, he warned, either must go to work voluntarily or be conscripted. The Minister of Labor said he wanted to enlist a majority of this feminine labor army outside the ranks of industrial workers. Girls now are being trained for factory work in 14 of the 37 government training centers, but there are still plenty of vacancies. Despite frequent appeals for women volunteers for war work or to replace men called up for the fighting services, the response is considerably below that of the World War, when 1,300,000 additional women went to work and nearly 500,000 domestic servants quit their jobs for offices and factories. A large-scale transfer of women from peacetime industries to war work, as demanded by Bevin, has started. Hundreds of women in the Leicester silk stocking industry have been released for munitions production. New York, January 31st. A movement to regulate the production of newsprint in Canadian mills owned wholly or partly by United States publishers has been revived during the last few months. Coincident with the filing of petitions with the Quebec and Ontario governments to control the production of these mills, a series of editorials has appeared in some Canadian newspapers criticizing the stand taken by such American dailies as the Chicago Tribune. The Chicago Tribune is interested in newsprint mills in the two provinces. The mills operated by the Ontario Paper Company always have been exempt from production controls on the ground that they were not competing with commercial mills, since their entire output supplied only a part of the needs of the Chicago Tribune and its New York affiliate, the Daily News. The rest is purchased in the open market. Removal of this exemption was asked in a petition filed by 15 municipalities in the Lake St. John region of Quebec. They contended the Ontario Paper Company's output should be limited to a prorated share in the interests of fair labor standards. A similar petition has been filed with the Prime Ministers of Ontario and Quebec by a group of commercial mills acting independently. Under the heading, Governments Urged to Put Pressure on McCormick's Interests in Pulp Paper Mills, the Huntington Gleaner in Quebec recently printed an attack on Colonel R.R. McCormick and the editorial policies of the Chicago Tribune, of which he is the editor and publisher. Accusing the Tribune of ungratefulness to the British Empire, the Gleaner's editorial said, "The next rightful move will be for our governments to put the pressure on McCormick's interests in Canadian pulp and paper mills." The Toronto Globe and Mail denounced a Chicago Tribune cartoon in an editorial last Tuesday, which observed, "Printed on paper made in Canada from Canadian pulpwood." Ottawa, Ontario, January 31st. Canada is far behind the United Kingdom in warfare production, Munitions Minister C.D. Howe said today at his first press conference since his return from England. He drew a picture of sharp contrast between a government and a people who are putting every ounce of effort into production and the leisurely methods pursued here. Howe promised great improvements soon, long-range bombers to be flown to Britain, heavy tanks, ships from existing shipyards and destroyers. There must be a much greater shift from peacetime to wartime production here, Howe said. Howe did not explain how it is to be done. On the possible transfer of British industries to Canada, Howe said a trickle had started. Budapest, Hungary, January 31st. The High Court of Justice today sentenced Carol Wirth, a Nazi member of parliament, to 15 years hard labor for conspiracy against the regent and the state. Another accused plotter was sentenced to 12 years, 2 to 11 years, and 5 to 4 years. Wirth and his associates were accused of preparing a putsch and of planning to seize Regent Nicholas Horthy and force him to assign the prime ministry to the leader of the Hungarian Nazis, Franz Zaslasy. Dublin, Ireland, January 31st. The Irish government announced tonight that it had provided for a system of military court trials which would become effective should the country be attacked by an outside power and would be comparable to the declaration of a state of siege or martial law. Military courts would be comprised of 3 commissioned officers with power to impose a death penalty to be carried out within 48 hours. Wellington, New Zealand, January 31st. The New Zealand government's decision to create a Women's Air Force Auxiliary has kept the recruiting offices here working at top speed. There have been many volunteers. Havana, Cuba, January 31st. Radio broadcasts in German, Chinese, Yiddish, and Polish were prohibited today by Major General Juan Gouveia, General of Radio, as a measure to combat totalitarian propaganda. And now back to national news. Washington, D.C., January 31st. A government order for 4.5 million casualty tags to be placed on killed or wounded soldiers indicates clearly that the Roosevelt administration intends to send American boys to fight on foreign soil, Senator Waylon Brooks, Republican, Illinois, declared today in an interview. The Illinois senator compared the new tags ordered by the War Department with those he wore during the World War and found only that the new tags differ in that they are more substantial than those used on him. Senator Brooks served in the United States Marines during the war and was wounded 7 times. He was promoted on the field of battle from corporal to the rank of first lieutenant by the time he retired at the age of 21. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, 73-year-old fire-eating interventionist, was quizzed closely about the casualty tag order when he appeared before the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee this week to testify in favor of the dictator bill guised as an aid to Britain measure. Stimson's explanation was that the tags were to be used for mock combat and peacetime maneuvers. Certain soldiers are designated as wounded, given a tag, and told to go to the rear. Senators ridiculed this explanation and expressed conviction that this was another step nearer war. Senator Brooks found that the tags looked like the real thing to him. The placing of a government order for 4.5 million identification tags to be placed on disabled or wounded men clarifies the government's plans and intentions more forcibly than any or all the evidence that will be obtained by questioning witnesses before the Foreign Relations Committee of the United States Senate, Senator Brooks said. Washington, D.C., January 31st. President Roosevelt disclosed today at his press conference that he and the cabinet have been discussing the question of taking over patent rights to further the defense program. The government is prepared, the president said, to take over control of factories if necessary, but that there is some question whether there is enough authority to do the same with patent properties. He added that it is largely a legal question and must be given further study. Mr. Roosevelt asserted that patents are as essential to the manufacture of defense products as factories and left no doubt that, in his mind, the government should be given full wartime privileges over privately owned patents. The discussion arose from the indictments returned yesterday against the Aluminum Company of America and other companies on charges of entering into a German-American combine to control magnesium production in this country. The Justice Department has been investigating the patent situation for more than a year with reference to possible restraints of trade, but officials have given no previous intimation of a legal study to determine what power the government has for acquiring patents vital to defense. Washington, D.C., January 31st. Henry Ford denied a $10 million War Department contract because of his exceptions to labor clauses offered today to build defense materials at cost if other manufacturers will do the same. The elderly automobile manufacturer telephoned this statement from his winter home in Georgia while in Washington. A War Department spokesman said that withholding the contract from Ford did not necessarily mean that a provision requiring compliance with all labor laws would be included in all future Army contracts. The lost contract involved trucks valued at $10 million. The Fargo Motor Corporation of Detroit, bidding $250,000 higher than Ford, got the contract. The labor clause to which Ford objected provided that the work executed under the contract should comply with federal statutory provisions affecting labor wherever such provisions are applicable. Robert P. Patterson, Undersecretary of War, told a congressional committee that the department was considering inclusion of such a requirement in all future contracts, but that the matter was still in the making. He said, too, that the department was not ready to recommend coercive legislation to curb labor disputes on defense projects. The labor clause was put into the Ford contract, Patterson testified, at the request of Sidney Hillman, Associate Director of the Office of Production Management. Patterson was asked by Representative J. Parnell Thomas, Republican, New Jersey, why the labor clause was not included in contracts previously awarded the Ford Company for $122,323,000 of airplane engines and $2 million for trucks and automobiles. The others were negotiated contracts, Patterson replied. Washington, D.C., January 31st. Further indication of the bogging down of American aerial rearmament was seen today in figures on airplane exports for December and all of 1940 obtained from the United States Department of Commerce. The figures show that Great Britain got 320 planes last month, a total below the 357 record shipping peak of last August. The total of plane exports for the month to all countries, it was disclosed, was 369, compared with an August total of 382. Exports for the entire year aggregated 3,514, with Great Britain receiving 2,063, including 1,379 shipped to England. On the basis of President Roosevelt's 50-50 rule for dividing planes between the United States and Great Britain, the December statistics indicate the total aircraft production for the month, including craft retained on this side of the Atlantic, was approximately 750. The president has acknowledged the 50-50 rule is an elastic one, and William S. Knutson, Director General of Production Management, recently asserted the number produced during the month was actually 799. Knutson's figure, larger of the two, is still only slightly more than half of the 1,500 planes which defense production schedules called for this country to be producing by this time, the 8th month of the preparedness program. Elizabeth, New Jersey, January 31st. A walkout of CIO employees of the Phelps Dodge Copper Products Corporation's Bayway plant, which firm President Wiley Brown said threatened to tie up more than $230 million in federal defense contracts, today brought a hurried United States move to end the dispute. Shortly after, the striking members of United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, Local 441, voted to remain out until their demands for a collective bargaining election and higher wages were met, William F. Cann, United States Labor Department's conciliator, union delegates, and firm officials went into a conference in New York. As he entered the conference, Peter D. Besch, international representative of the union, said the strike would be extended to the company's 3 other plants at Yonkers, New York, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Los Angeles unless there was a quick settlement. Police Chief Frank Brennan appeared before the strikers and appealed for cooperation in preventing disorder at the plant, where work on $74,323 worth of United States Navy contracts as well as other materials was halted at 6 a.m. The firm employs 1,600. Brown said in a statement that the Bayway plant made products for other manufacturers of defense materials and that more than $200 million in defense orders depends on our supplying these manufacturers. In addition, he declared the company had $30 million in Army and Navy contracts in its 4 plants. This stoppage of work, Brown said, is a strike called with utter disregard for the rules and regulations of the National Labor Relations Act and is designed to force us to void our present contract by consenting to an immediate election among our employees. Washington, D.C., January 31st. Representative Albert J. Engel, Republican, Michigan, said today he was attempting to determine whether sponsors of a deluxe civilian conservation corps camp at Sharon, Vermont, were trying to institute a system of labor camps in the United States similar to those in Germany. Engel said the plan for the Sharon camp, which he described as a camp for overprivileged, was fostered by Dr. Eugene Rosenstock, QC, Dartmouth professor who was born in Berlin and came to the United States in 1933. I understand he is not an American citizen, but has applied for citizenship, and that, according to Who's Who, he is the man who instituted the German labor camps from 1925 to 1933, Engel said. Engel referred to a camp which Secretary of the Interior Claude Wickard said was established as an experiment to improve CCC administration in a sound trial and error way. Members of the camp include 14 or 15 Harvard and Dartmouth students and graduates, Engel said. Although Wickard said the camp, administered by the Agriculture Department, had enrolled non-needy persons to aid in developing CCC leaders for future camp activities, Engel declared, "I find no legal authority for spending funds on enrollees not in need." But James J. McEntee, CCC director, said the enrollment qualification called for a person that was unemployed and in need of a job. However, it was learned authoritatively the CCC had undertaken an investigation of the project. At a recent press conference, Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt disclosed that she had helped in establishing the camp. She related that last June, 2 college youths, one from Harvard and the other from Dartmouth, told her that from their experience in CCC camps, they believed an opportunity was being missed to develop leadership. Engel referred to the camp as the Columnist Camp, remarking that besides Mrs. Roosevelt, Dorothy Canfield Fisher and Dorothy Thompson, both of whom have Vermont residences, were interested in the plan. Manila, Philippine Islands, January 31st. The manpower and material resources of the Philippines are at the disposal of the United States in the present disturbed situation, Manuel Quezon, Commonwealth President, declared tonight in his message to the National Assembly. While pointing out that the islands were doing everything possible in connection with the National Defense Program, Quezon stressed that with our own resources alone, we are in no position to defend ourselves. He expressed a hope, therefore, that the defense program includes the Philippines, which are due to become independent in 1946. Defense of our country remains primarily the responsibility of the United States. This is as it should be because as long as the Philippines are under the American flag, it rests exclusively with the United States to determine whether the Commonwealth shall be at peace or war, he added. San Juan, Puerto Rico, January 31st. 11 Puerto Ricans today were arraigned before United States District Court Judge C.C. White on the charge of failure to register for selective service. All pleaded not guilty. 5 were released on bail. Several of the defendants said they would not register for military service for the United States because we are citizens of the Republic of Puerto Rico. Hattiesburg, Mississippi, January 31st. Speculation as to whether sabotage figured in the wreck of a troop train in which 19 Indiana National Guardsmen were injured was revived today following the statement that a suspicious split had been found in a rail near the scene of the accident. Washington, D.C., January 31st. President Roosevelt at his press conference today said he had been told that Burton K. Wheeler, Democrat, Montana, the leader of Senate opposition to the pending dictator bill in 1934, was convinced that German domination of Europe was inevitable. The president made his remarks about Wheeler in response to questions on a series of magazine articles based on the diary of William E. Dodd, late ambassador to Germany. In this diary, Dodd related that a senator told him while attending a dinner at the home of Rexford Guy Tugwell, brain truster in the administration, who at that time was Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, that the Nazis were bound to dominate Europe, just as Japan would dominate Asia, and the United States should control the Western Hemisphere. Newton, New Jersey, January 31st. A rural judge who ruled there was no room in this country for anti-Semitism today sentenced Wilhelm Kunz, national leader of the German-American Bund, and 8 associates to serve 1 year to 14 months in prison. 2 of the 9 were fined $2,000 each, and the others $1,000 each. 3 speeches made at the Bunds' Camp Nordland in nearby Andover last June led to their indictment under New Jersey's race hatred law. They admitted the addresses defending them as permissible while attacking the statute as unconstitutional, but Judge John C. Losey had overruled their plea in demurrer. The bald-spectacled judge of the Sussex County Court then set bail at $2,000 each, pending an appeal which defense counsel said would be taken to the United States Supreme Court if necessary. Bail was posted for Kunz, August Kleprot of Andover, the Bunds' Eastern Regional Leader, Matthias Kohler, Irvington State Bund Treasurer, and Paul Schnarschmidt, Patterson Camp Nordland Trustee. Sheriff Denton J. Quick said, however, that the following 5 were lodged in the county jail for the night, bail failing to arrive before the county clerk's office closed. The Reverend John C. Fitting, Union City State Bund Secretary, Leonard D. Clark, New York, writer for a Bund publication, Carl Shiphorst, Glen Rock Camp Trustee, Richard Shirley, Patterson Trustee, George Newport, Cliffside Park Trustee. With the exception of Clark, each was sentenced to prison and fined $1,000 for permitting the speeches. Clark's prison term and fine were for making a speech, while Klaprot and Kohler were fined an extra $1,000 for making speeches. You cannot penalize people for speaking their own mind, William A. Azzoli of Newark, defense attorney, told the court in trying to avert sentence. Judge Losey countered that the Constitution guaranteed religious freedom and there was no room for those disagreeing with it. It seems to be conceded, commented the court, that the purpose of the German-American Bund is to attain ascendancy over the Jews. San Quentin, California, January 31st. With calm fatalism, DeWitt Clinton Cook, 21 years old, died in San Quentin Prison's gas chamber today for the murder of Anya Sasoyeva, 24, a dancer and art student who was bludgeoned 2 years ago at Los Angeles, California. All night long in his death cell, he had played a radio, making no attempt to sleep. He ate no breakfast. He told a guard last night, "I have made up my mind. I have to go." Some weeks ago, he had appealed for executive clemency on the plea that "I am a young man still." Bridgeport, Connecticut, January 31st. Joseph Spell, 31-year-old Negro servant accused of raping his employer, Mrs. Eleanor Strubing, pretty Greenwich Society woman, was acquitted tonight by a Superior Court jury of 6 men and 6 women. Detroit, Michigan, January 31st. The automobile plants of the United States and Canada assembled approximately 535 vehicles in January, the highest volume in any month since May 1937. At that time, the month's assemblies totaled 540,377, Ward's Reports Incorporated said today. Production for the current week was placed at 124,400 cars and trucks compared with 121,948 last week and 101,240 a year ago. Marion, Ohio, January 31st. Twins were born to Mrs. D.E. Lush today in an automobile as her husband drove 2 miles over icy streets from their home to a hospital. At the hospital, the mother and babies, a boy and a girl, were reported doing nicely. Lush is Marion County Deputy Treasurer. Boston, Massachusetts, January 31st. The future of Lois Andrew Jessel, wife of comedian George Jessel, as a Boston nightclub entertainer, depended today upon her ability to furnish proof that she was 21 and not 16 years old. The Boston License Commission asked for proof after taking cognizance of the fact that her age was heralded at 15 at the time of her marriage to Jessel more than a year ago. Under Massachusetts law, a girl under 21 cannot be employed as an entertainer in any establishment where liquor is served. And now for local and regional news. 300 Chicago mothers met in the Hamilton Park Fieldhouse, 69th Street and Normal Avenue on the night of January 23rd. In receiving their meeting permit, they told the Fieldhouse director, James Lackey, that their organization, the National Legion of Mothers, was discussing the necessity of keeping America out of war. Lackey said there was no objection to that topic. The speakers of the evening were Mrs. Elizabeth Dilling, 545 Essex Road, Kenilworth, author of The Red Network, a compilation of so-called radicals and communists in this country, and Mrs. G.M. Van Hinning, 6210 Greenwood Avenue, a lecturer on Americanism. They declared that the administration Lend-Lease bill, if passed by Congress, would give President Roosevelt dictatorial power and drive the country into war. The women, many of whom have sons of military age, aren't meeting in the Fieldhouse anymore. Mrs. Thomas Keefe, 6209 Laughlin Street, chairman of the group, was asked why last night. As soon as we started criticizing President Roosevelt, she said, Mr. Lackey told us we couldn't gather there again. I told him, we're taxpayers. Why can't we meet here? He said, I have my orders from higher up. A Tribune reporter talked to Lackey later in the evening. Sure, I said they couldn't have any more meetings in the Fieldhouse, Lackey said. Those women were running down President Roosevelt. You know where I'd stand with the powers that be if I allowed that? Who do you mean by the powers that be, he was asked. The Park District Commissioners, Lackey replied. Mrs. Elizabeth Dilling, author of The Red Network, told an audience of 500 last night that if the war dictatorship bill is passed, we are in Nero's hands. She spoke at a meeting of the Citizens Keep America Out of War Committee in the LaSalle Hotel. We need to get rid of the spirit of defeatism in regard to House Bill 1776, she said, because if it is passed, we are all through. At the end of the line, we are in Nero's hands. If this bill becomes law, the only thing we can do is start subterranean organizations in an effort to win back the republic. Mrs. Dilling urged women to join her in a march on Washington to protest passage of the bill. She said that when the bill leaves the House for the Senate, it will be the signal for women throughout the country to converge on the Capitol to express their disapproval. Illinois Selective Service officials were marking time last night in their search for a legal solution to a dispute over granting blanket deferments to married men of draft age. They awaited the return of Paul G. Armstrong, state draft director, who is en route to Springfield from Washington, D.C. after a conference with national draft officials. The controversy was provoked early this week when a Springfield local board announced that henceforth it will grant deferments to all married men, regardless of the question of dependency, to prevent disruption of family life. Another Springfield board, which had followed the established custom of deciding the status of each married draftee upon the question of dependency, protested to state headquarters against the action of the first board. State officials issued a call for 297 draftees from 17 counties to report for induction in the Army on February 10th, the first day of the February induction period. The men will report at the Chicago Induction Depot in the 122nd Field Artillery Armory. Oscar E. Hewitt, Commissioner of Public Works, said yesterday that 2,100 cubic yards of garbage and rubbish are being dumped daily in Lake Calumet at 103rd Street, where land is being made for an airport. The site will hold an estimated 3.5 million cubic yards, Hewitt said. With $500,000 worth of national defense orders on hand, the International Register Company, which makes precision instruments and small machines, yesterday purchased a plant which will more than double its floor space. It bought for $232,500 cash the 6-story concrete fireproof factory building at the northeast corner of Washington Boulevard at Towman Avenue, extending north to Maypole Street. The building was sold by Linderman Holverson Company through Hart and Wetson, which represented all parties. A.H. Woodward, president, said the new plant will give International Register 120,000 square feet of floor space, compared with 45,000 at the present plant at 15 South Throop Street. Personnel offices to hire the thousands of workers who will man Chicago's two big aircraft engine factories will not be set up for some weeks or possibly months, officials of the two automobile companies that will operate the plants disclosed yesterday. The Buick division of General Motors will build a plant to employ about 10,000 at the northeast corner of LaGrange Road and North Avenue. The Studebaker Corporation will build its plant, employing about 4,000 at Cicero and Archer Avenues. Announcement regarding the details of the personnel offices will be made later. A list of Illinois companies qualified to serve as ship contractors will be compiled for Commissioner Watson O. Bailey, Inspector of Naval Material for the 9th Naval District, by officials of the Illinois Manufacturers Association. This assurance was given at a special meeting yesterday to lay plans for obtaining naval shipbuilding orders in the Midwest. The session was called after the association had received a telegram from Senator C. Waylon Brooks, Republican Illinois, asserting that prospects were good for Illinois companies and urging united action. He based his message on large appropriation bills for naval construction just passed or pending before the Senate. Representatives of 65 Negro organizations charged yesterday that the government is discriminating against the Negro both in the nation's armed forces and in defense jobs. The charges were made at the opening of the conference on the national defense of the Chicago Council of Negro Organizations in the Wabash Avenue YMCA, 3763 Wabash Avenue. Delegates heard A.L. Foster, Executive Secretary of the Chicago Urban League, assert that Negroes are not getting jobs and other benefits under the National Defense Program. We also protest the announced policy of the Army General Staff that Negroes will be segregated in separate units in the Army and Air Corps, Foster said. We protest their exclusion from the Marine Corps and the Navy's practice of using them only as messmen and in other menial capacities. Delegates will discuss today a proposed 5-year plan for solving the social and economic problems of Negroes. Residential segregation, health, unemployment, and local discrimination are scheduled for consideration. Franklin Bliss Snyder, president of Northwestern University, announced yesterday that trustees of the university have approved measures to safeguard the positions of full-time members of the faculty who are called into military service. The university expects to grant leaves of absence to faculty members called into the service and to replace them with temporary substitutes. The university has 962 faculty members and 682 lecturers, assistants, and fellows. Of these, 182 are of draft age, 98 are reserve officers, and about 200 are World War veterans. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, January 31st. International President R.J. Thomas of the CIO United Automobile Workers Union tonight announced his withdrawal from negotiations seeking to settle a 10-day-old strike that has halted production of $40 million in national defense orders at the Allis-Chalmers Manufacturing Company. Thomas said no headway was made at a conference in which he and other union representatives met with Max W. Babb, company president, and other company representatives. Federal conciliators attended the meeting. Thomas asserted that he was withdrawing because Babb refused to be present at another meeting of company and union representatives scheduled for tomorrow. Harold Christoffel, president of the local CIO unit, denied a charge made by Representative Claire E. Hoffman, Republican Michigan, in the House at Washington, D.C. today that he was a communist. Main issue of the strike involves the union demand for a union shop. A large number of workmen, estimates ran from 100 to 200, who have been employed on the construction of the government's munitions plant near Elwood in Will County, were discharged yesterday. Nearly all were members of the Carpenters or Laborers Union. Spokesman for the contracting firm Sanderson and Porter said the dismissals were made because these workers were not keeping up with the pace required on the project. Some of the men said they would protest today to their unions against having their cards inscribed with unsatisfactory worker. Representatives of the Carpenters District Council in Joliet, which collects dues from the carpenters on the defense job and in many instances initiation fees, professed to know nothing of the dismissals. The council had certified all carpenters as competent workmen. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 31st. Roscoe Turner, noted speed flyer, proposed today formation of an armada of 200,000 converted Flivver planes manned by private pilots for home defense. Turner said such a force could be established and equipped in a year and a half and would be a mighty force in repelling an invasion by land or sea. There are 30,000 such planes now in use in the United States, and these could be increased to 200,000 in 18 months, he said. The cheapest military plane you've got is around $35,000. You can get these little ships in bunches like bananas for $2,000 apiece. Turner suggested that each two-place plane be converted into a single-seater, with the second seat fitted with a rack for a 100-pound bomb or two 50-pounders. Springfield, Illinois, January 31st. Governor Dwight H. Green today asked the United States House Appropriations Subcommittee investigating violations of the Hatch Act to turn over to him information of pernicious political activity by several employees of the Illinois Highway Department. The subcommittee Wednesday disclosed in Washington that Cecil E. Custer, Federal Civil Service Commission official, had reported political activity by Illinois Highway Department employees covered by the Hatch Anti-Politics Act. Judge Philip Finnegan in Circuit Court refused yesterday to authorize Karol Rypa, Polish counsel, and attorney Oskar Thiemi to distribute $100,000 to 10 heirs of the late Frank Konchikowski, Southside real estate dealer, who left $100,000 to his $160,000 estate to 10 relatives in Poland. Rypa claimed authority to make the distribution under existing treaties with the republics of Poland, while Thiemi asserted that power of attorney was assigned to him by a Polish bank representing the heirs. The Chicago Title and Trust Company, as executor, had asked the court to decide who should distribute the money. Judge Finnegan ruled that the money should be held in trust by the trust company since no one knows if the heirs are alive. Disbarment of Eugene L. McGarry, central figure in a bail bond scandal while he was a judge of the municipal court in 1939, was recommended to the Illinois Supreme Court yesterday by the Grievance Committee and the Board of Managers of the Chicago Bar Association. The committee and the board, which acted as special commissioners of the Supreme Court in investigating McGarry's conduct, made their findings in a 284-page report filed with the court in Springfield. The commissioners find the report concluded that the conduct of McGarry has been unprofessional, unethical, dishonorable, and denotes a lack of good moral character and tends to bring the profession of law and the courts of justice into disrepute and contempt. The commissioners recommend that McGarry be disbarred and that his name be stricken from the roll of attorneys. St. Louis, Missouri, January 31st. Illinois farmers and farm leaders reaffirmed their faith in present government farm policies today at the final session of the Illinois Agricultural Association Convention, but they warned that they would not tolerate any attempt to socialize agriculture either through centralization of authority in the hands of the Secretary of Agriculture or through tampering with existing farm credit laws. In the adoption of resolutions and in speeches by farm leaders, the association indicated that agriculture must have a free hand in shaping its policies, but asked for no fundamental change in present federal laws. The resolution adopted asked that central governmental supervision of the whole system of farm credit be placed under the direction and supervision of an independent, nonpartisan board appointed by the president. Earl E. Smith, Detroit Pike County president of the association for 15 years, was reelected. The term of the federal grand jury investigating vote frauds was extended another month yesterday. The extension, the second since the hearing began on November 14th, was granted by Judge Charles E. Woodward at the request of Martin Ward, Assistant United States Attorney in charge of the investigation. Handbook patrons in Chicago had a bad day yesterday. 98 of them, including 6 women, were seized by police in raids on 2 Loop betting parlors in a new scheme to smash the gambling syndicate run by Frank the Enforcer Nitti, wearer of the gangland crown formerly owned by his old boss, Al Capone. The raids were made on the second floor at 45 South Wells Street and on the second floor at 122 South Clark Street. The 98 bettors, with 14 handbook employees, were taken in patrol wagons to the central station and booked. This was the first wholesale action of its kind in nearly 20 years. Police Commissioner Allman personally issued the order to arrest the patrons. He was reported angered because the 2 places were raided within the last week and didn't stay closed. Patrons of all types fell into police hands. Among them were 2 lawyers, 3 brokers, an accountant, an advertising man, a real estate dealer, a retired businessman, various salesmen and clerks, a manicurist, 2 housewives, and laborers. The Wells Street raid was made by a squad headed by Sergeant Jim Kehoe from Captain McCormick's Morals and Gambling Division. In all, 71 persons, 59 men and 4 women patrons, and 8 operators were seized. Lawrence Davison, 42 years old, and his wife, Freda, 43, of 510 Keeney Street, Evanston, were placed on probation for 1 year yesterday by federal judge Michael L. Igo. Davison pleaded guilty of embezzling $9,541 from the Central National Bank, where he was a teller. His wife was charged with aiding him. Edward O'Ryan, Assistant United States Attorney, told the court full restitution had been made and that probation officers had recommended a light sentence. Davison said he used the money for stock market speculations. Harold Kirk left the cell in the county jail's Alimony Row yesterday to begin an automobile trip to San Bernardino County, California, in custody of 2 deputy sheriffs. He is wanted there to stand trial on a murder charge brought in 1925. The charge was discovered through fingerprint identification after Kirk had been jailed here pending settlement of a $7,000 alimony and support claim by his former wife, Mrs. Alice Kirk of Madison, Wisconsin. Kirk waived extradition. California authorities agreed to return him to Chicago if he is acquitted of the murder charge. Saginaw, Michigan, January 31st. Circuit Court Judges William H. Martin and James E. O'Neill today ordered a one-man grand jury investigation of strike disorders at the Wilcox Rich plant of the Eaton Manufacturing Company here January 13th, in which 6 policemen were injured and 26 striking members of the United Automobile Workers, CIO, were arrested on felonious assault charges. Mrs. Gladys McKinney, 54 years old, a widow, was found shot and killed last night in her home at 312 East 29th Street. Within an hour, Sergeants James Mikas and Ray Lamb arrested Walter Meyer, alias Magnuson, 37 years old, a laborer, as her slayer. Meyer, who lived in the McKinney home, confessed he had been drinking and that he killed the widow earlier in the day when he quarreled with her over the use of her car. He was seized in a tavern at 2841 Indiana Avenue. Mrs. McKinney's daughter, Loretta, said her mother had befriended Meyer and allowed him to live in their home for the last 15 years. A jury in the criminal court of Judge John F. Bolton late last night convicted Louis DeRosa, 47, a tavern owner, of the murder last April 10th of Joseph Casentino, 42, an ex-convict, and fixed his punishment at 14 years in the penitentiary. DeRosa, who was at liberty on a $50,000 bond, was taken into custody pending his hearing next Friday on a motion for a new trial. He was accused of fatally shooting Casentino during an altercation in a restaurant at 450 North Halsted Street. DeRosa testified Casentino drew the gun and that it was discharged when he tried to grab it. The two men had been friends for years. A spectacular fire for which a 411 alarm was sounded late last night virtually destroyed the Chicago freight depot of the Silver Fleet Motor Express Company at 3357 South Justine Street. The loss included 26 trucks loaded with merchandise. Edward Lukens, depot manager, estimated the loss at more than $300,000. The company headquarters is in Louisville, Kentucky. The blaze started when some gasoline became ignited as one of the trucks was being fueled inside the depot. The flames spread rapidly through the one-story brick building, which extends about a block and a half and is 100 feet deep. 11 of the trucks destroyed were inside the depot and the others were standing outside at the loading platform. Mrs. Frances DeYoung, 35 years old, 1356 East 53rd Street, divorced mother of a 9-year-old girl, was found fatally shot, apparently a suicide, in the home of Edward Green at 1309 East 50th Street yesterday. She was a bacteriologist at County Hospital. William Hall, colored businessman in Green's home, said Mrs. DeYoung spent Thursday night there waiting for Green, who was in Peoria on business and did not return until noon yesterday. In the morning, John Pasquale, foreman in the Green Shade Company at the rear of the home, found a note from Mrs. DeYoung on his desk when he came to work. He then entered the house and found her in Green's bedroom with a bullet in the head. Pasquale called an ambulance which took Mrs. DeYoung to Illinois Central Hospital, where she died shortly afterwards. Another note addressed to Green was not opened. Green, who is 40 years old, is president of the Shade Company. He told police he last saw Mrs. DeYoung when they had dinner together Wednesday. Mrs. DeYoung's daughter, Claire, lives in South Holland, Illinois, with the parents of her former husband, C.R. DeYoung, Swift & Company bacteriologist, from whom she was divorced 5 years ago. Death on the highways, falls suffered in the home, and injuries suffered at work. Accidental deaths of all kinds took 96,500 lives and injured 9,100,000 people last year in the United States. And the estimated economic loss from these accidents through wages lost, medical expenses, insurance, and property damage was $3.5 billion. These facts were announced yesterday by the National Safety Council as the accident toll for 1940. It exceeds the 1939 toll by 4%. Following is the 1940 accident death toll by classifications. Motor vehicle, 1940, 34,400, 1939, 32,386, an increase of 6%. Public, 15,500 in 1940, 15,500 in 1939, no change. Home, 32,500 in 1940, 32,000 in 1939, a 2% change. Occupational, 17,000 in 1940, 15,500 in 1939, a 10% change. The definition of public means accidents on public carriers drownings, deaths from falls in public places, etc. Although traffic deaths increased 6% in 1940, the council said this was accompanied by an equal increase in travel. 45 persons, 35 of them passengers, were killed in aviation accidents. The council said approximately 1,144,000,000 passenger miles were flown during the year, indicating a passenger death rate of 3.1 for each million miles. 8 suburban dairies, which buy and sell their milk within Illinois, lost a plea in federal court yesterday that they be exempted from federal milk marketing control. Judge John P. Barnes ruled that the Chicago milk market is of an interstate character and that hence the business of the defendants affects the current of the interstate trade. Mrs. Mary Connor Myers, attorney for the Federal Milk Market Administrator, said Judge Barnes' ruling was in conflict with the decision in a similar case last October by Judge Charles E. Woodward. This case, involving the Wrightwood Dairy Company, 2942 North Ashland Avenue, is now before the Court of Appeals. Attorneys for the 8 dairies involved in the case before Judge Barnes said their clients would meet Wednesday to decide whether they would appeal the decision or ask the Secretary of Agriculture for relief. Voters in a portion of Norwood Park Township will go to the polls February 15th to determine whether a majority of those living in the area desire annexation to Chicago. An order for the election was issued yesterday by County Judge Edmund K. Jarecki. The area involved has a population of 2,500. It is bounded by Montrose Avenue, Oriole Avenue, Irving Park Road, and Ozanam Avenue. Proponents of the annexation recently asked Judge Jarecki to certify that a petition had a sufficient number of legitimate signatures, but opponents challenged the petition and obtained the order for an election. The election will be held under the supervision of Robert Taylor, Election Board Attorney, from noon to 9 p.m. in the James Giles High School in the district. If those who favor annexation win the election, they must then seek the approval of the City Council. And in sports, New York, January 31st. A tough guy's dream of winning the World's Heavyweight Championship ended after 2 minutes and 49 seconds of the 5th round of a scheduled 15-round bout before 18,061 in Madison Square Garden tonight when Clarence "Red" Berman's strength fading fast from his tired arms fell before the thundering fists of champion Joe Louis. Red, the ex-chauffeur from Baltimore, who hollered for his chance for more than 2 years, lived up to all his pre-battle promises to make a fight of it. He had the spirit and the heart and gave all he had, but it was not enough. After being battered steadily without taking a backward step in the first 4 rounds, Red caught a right flush under his head, fell over a low rope near his own corner, and became just another of the legion for whom the Louis bell tolled. The gross gate was 62,899. Lafayette, Indiana, January 31st. Indiana's basketball team, only unbeaten squad in Western Conference competition, will seek its 4th straight victory here tomorrow night against Purdue. However, the Hoosiers' hopes of speeding to an easy conquest were dealt a severe blow tonight when it was learned that Indiana will be without the services of Paul Curly Armstrong, the team's leading scorer of last season, due to scholastic ineligibility. Armstrong will miss tomorrow's battle with Purdue and Monday's game with Ohio State, but there is a possibility he may make up his scholastic deficiency late next week. With Armstrong out of the lineup, Coach Branch McCracken has shifted Herman Schaefer, who has teamed with Armstrong in basketball since the two boys were in the 4th grade in Fort Wayne, from forward to guard. A capacity crowd of 9,000 will pack the Purdue Fieldhouse for the game, the only scheduled battle of the night between Big Ten quintets. The Boilermakers, fighting to stay out of the 2nd Division, have been working on controlling rebounds in practice this week. Purdue counts on Forrest Sproul, Don Blanken, and Captain Bob Igney to match Indiana in scoring. The Loyola University basketball team will meet Illinois Wesleyan tonight in Loyola Gymnasium. Two players who attained their sophomore rank with the start of the second semester will make their first appearance on the Loyola floor. They made their intercollegiate debut against Chicago's Maroons on Thursday. They are Jack Stanton, a former star at St. George, who is to start at forward, and Jack Dwan from Sen. Both are expected to bolster the Northsiders' attack. Bob Voits and Don Heap, who played for Northwestern a few years back, coached the Illinois Wesleyan squad, which held Notre Dame to a 34-28 victory at the start of the season. The game, which starts at 8:15, is the first since the home and home series of 1933, which Illinois Wesleyan won by 28-21 and 33-22 scores. Toronto, Ontario, January 31st. Still on the trail of their first victory of the current road trip, the Blackhawks arrived in Toronto today for a battle with the league-leading Maple Leafs tomorrow night. On Sunday night, the two teams will square off again in the Chicago Stadium, marking the third time this season they have met on successive nights. The Hawks lost more than a hockey match in being set back by the Americans in New York 5-4 last night. Center Bill Karst suffered a deep skate gash in his left leg early in the evening and will be out of the lineup for at least 10 days. Pep Kelly, former Leaf, will play in Karst's place against Toronto. Saturday night is movie night. Let's see what is playing in the downtown Chicago movie theaters. At the Chicago Theater State near Randolph, She Kept Him Sizzling, and Did He Burn Up? It's Rosalind Russell and Melvin Douglas in Columbia's This Thing Called Love with Benny Barnes. And on the stage, we have the exotic star of song, Gertrude Nielsen. And extras include Paramount World News, Kate Smith Comedy Riots, and Friday begins For Mothers and the Gene Krupa Band with the Andrews Sisters on the stage. That looks like a good one. And at the Oriental, Randolph near State Street, on the stage, Joe Besser and Company, Ross and Stone, George West, Friday Dancers, and others. And an extra held over, Larry Adler. And on the screen in its first loop showing, 6 Lessons of Love from an Expert, Marian Hopkins in Lady with Red Hair with Claude Rains. She started at the top and worked up. At the State Lake, the Wonder Girl and her Wonder Show in person. It's Sally Rand with Jackie Heller, Sid Tomac, and Reese Brothers, and Burnett and Parks, DeVal Merle and Lee, and 16 ballet beauties. And on the screen in its first loop run, thrill-laden, danger-defying adventure. It's Pat O'Brien and Constance Bennett in Escape to Glory with John Holliday and Alan Baxter. And at the United Artists at Randolph at Dearborn Streets, it's Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, James Stewart in The Philadelphia Story. And an extra. We have a few extras here. We have The March of Time, uncensored and exclusive, and a Disney color cartoon along with the latest news. And at the RKO Palace, Randolph at LaSalle Streets, it's tremendous. Ginger Rogers and Christopher Morley's daring and intimate natural history of a woman. It's Kitty Foyle, RKO's Triumph with Dennis Morgan, James Craig, Eduardo Gianelli, plus Mystery Thrills, The Saint in Palm Springs with George Sanders. At the Roosevelt State near Washington Streets, Thrills Sky High, it's Robert Taylor with Ruth Hussey and Walter Pidgeon in Flight Command, and the Late World News. At the Garrick, it's Melody Romance with Fred Astaire and Paulette Goddard and Artie Shaw and his band in Second Chorus, along with Late World News events. At the Apollo, Randolph at Clark Streets, Daring Indeed, Dashing in Love, Adventurer Supreme, it's Edward Small presents The Son of Monte Cristo with Lewis Hayward, Joan Bennett, George Sanders, released through United Artists, and Late World News events. At the McVickers, Madison near State Street, it's 2 hits. Alice Faye, Jack Oakey, Betty Grable in Tin Pan Alley. And French O'Tone with Peggy Morgan in Trail of the Vigilantes. At the Woods, Randolph and Dearborn Streets, we have Myrna Loy, Melvin Douglas, and Lee Bauman in Third Finger Left Hand. And Martha Scott and Cary Grant in Howards of Virginia. At the Telenews, the Newsreel Theater stayed at Randolph Streets, the most interesting show in Chicago, 1-hour program of news and shorts. At the LaSalle, Madison near Clark Street, advanced showings, Melvin Douglas and Myrna Loy in Third Finger Left Hand, and Cary Grant in the Howards of Virginia. And at the studio, Van Buren at Michigan, we have It's Sensational, It's Different, It's Daring. See it, it's the best picture I ever saw, says Walter Winchell. And it's spoken in English. Well, that's a plus. And the Chicago Tribune, it's Girls in Uniform. And an extra, the Chicago Tribune presents The All-American Way. And at the Monroe, we have Jeffrey Lynn, Brenda Marshall, Money and the Woman, and Wallace Beery in Thunder Afloat. And at the Clark, we have John Ford's production of Eugene O'Neill's prize play, The Long Voyage Home, and She Couldn't Say No, starring Roger Pryor. And at the World Playhouse, 410 South Michigan, near Van Buren, in its third and last week. Fast-moving and exciting, Night Train is tangy with the condiments of romance and suspense. Thriller Deluxe, Night Train is superb in all its elements. Be sure to make the Night Train one of the best you'll see this year. And that is news as read from the Chicago Tribune. Henry Chopp reporting, Saturday, February 1st, 1941. Have a swell day.